My name is Bethany Henry, and I'm going to present a painting I did to represent the four different styles of attachment. Just a little overview over what the attachment theory represents. It was pioneered by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth in the 1950s, and Bowlby had discovered through the observation of several others four different phases of developmental attachment. The first phase is called the pre-attachment phase, and this happens around 0 to 6 weeks of age. And basically, what Bowlby had stated is that during this phase, infants might display attachment like behaviors, but they're not really attached to one individual at the moment. Contrary to this, later on, researchers did find out that newborns actually show signs of attachment towards their mother by recognizing smell and different attachment behaviors as well. The second phase is called the attachment in the making, and this happens around 6 to 8 months of age. And during this time, babies start crying and smiling and showing these signals towards certain individuals. Um, and the third phase is clear cut attachment phase. And during this phase, it's around 6 to 8 months to about 18 months to 2 years. And around this phase, infants are actively staying near their primary caregiver, and they're also showing signals of distress when their primary caregiver leaves. And they also show signals of trying to be with that person, whether clinging to them or crawling to them. And it's around the last phase where it's called the reciprocal relationship phase, where infants really start to back off a little bit. They start to understand their parents are going to come and go and work with them by adjusting themselves. And they also start to build relationships with other individuals, such as grandparents, aunts, uncles. And that last phase happens around 18 months to around 2 years and on. And after Bowlby's four phases of attachment were in place, Mary Ainsworth joined him, and together they discovered, social interactions between infants and parents or caregivers are extremely important. And these social interactions can actually have a toll on how children develop attachment bonds with not just their primary caregivers, but also later in life, and it could affect their adult relationships as well. So Mary Ainsworth, she conducted an observation study called the Strange Situation, and she took mothers and infants and a stranger and did a 3-part test in which her and other researchers studied the reactions and the behaviors of infants. The first stage of this study was a mother in the room with her infant, and they observed to see if the infant would play with toys or not when the mother was in the room. The second phase was when a stranger would come into the room and the mother would leave, and they would observe how the infant interacted with the stranger. And then the third phase was the mother would return to the room, and they would observe to see how the infant reacted when the mother returned. And so through this, Ainsworth discovered 3 different attachment styles. And the first type is type A, and it's secure avoidant attachment. And this is when an infant doesn't really have a preference between a stranger or the primary caregiver. And when they're in distress, they usually will not seek out their caregiver. And the type B, second type, is called secure attachment. And this is when infants show an attachment to their parent, and when the parent leaves, they get upset, and when the parent returns, they feel comforted. They also, when they're in distress, they will seek out their primary caregiver. The third, type C, is called insecure resistant or anxious attachment. And during this, with this type of attachment, infants will usually cling to their primary caregiver, but they also won't want to explore on their own, and they're very fearful and timid. And when they are in distress, their responses are escalated, and they usually get very, very scared if their caregiver is not around. So type D was discovered. So this is going to be the fourth type, and this was discovered by researchers later on, and it's called disorganized attachment. And through this attachment, infants tend to show signs of confusion, maybe depression. They have sporadic responses, and it can just seem like they're a little bit disoriented. And what usually stems from this is they have a caregiver, primary caregiver, that might be helpful and attentive 1 minute, but also really hurtful and or abusive. And so these 4 different styles are usually things that define infants, and sometimes psychologists, for the most part, might conduct experiments with adults who are struggling in the future. And what it happens is they'll do, an attachment assessment and kind of discover if they're having issues in their later life, where that's stemming from. So what I did is I did a painting that represents these 4 different styles, and I did it through nature and how nature can also display these different styles. Though animals and humans are very different when it comes to attachment. But here we have the secure attachment with the deer and fawn. And deers usually will cling to fawns will cling to the doe, but they'll also venture out on their own. Their mom usually won't be very far behind, and they know that, so they'll venture off a little bit, and they know that she's going to protect them. So then up here with the bird, and that's showing the disorganized attachment style, because the baby bird has fallen out of the nest and the mother bird seems to not really show signs of caring. And this is very common with birds when they're very attentive to their hatchlings, but if one of their hatchlings falls out of the tree, most of the time they're not going to do anything to rescue that little bird. So the mother bird with its baby bird is showing that. Insecure attachment it's displayed here between the duckling and the swan. And I did a duck and a swan just so that there's a contrast between the two, but usually mother ducks will take on hatchlings that aren't their own, as long as they're around the same age as their ducklings. And swans will take care of ducks, but it's not very common because you really can't get a swan egg slipped into a duck's nest easily. But this display is showing that the duckling is not with its mother, but is just fine and content. And then the squirrel with the baby squirrel, and the baby squirrel is clinging into the chest of its mother, kind of fearful, is showing the anxious attachment style. And I actually got this picture from a live picture on the internet, and squirrels are usually timid as is, but the mother squirrels usually take really good care of their pups when they're born, and their survival rate is really low if they don't have their mother around. And she is very attentive to them and clings to them, and you can see pictures of squirrels on their mother's back. And so I really thought that the squirrels would represent the anxious attachment style really well. And that's my presentation.